Good morning, and do we have some echo? Yeah, and welcome to Pittsburgh City Council's Cablecast Post Agenda for Monday, March 4th, 2024, as we discuss DOMI's Complete Streets Action Group Biennial Report. For the record, we are joined today by Councilmember Mosley, Councilmember Strasburger, and Councilmember Gross, I believe, is on the phone and on her way in. Okay, so with that, welcome our DOMI team. If you all want to introduce yourselves, and then I'll let you take it away with the presentation. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jeff Leonard. I'm a planner in DOMI.
Panini Chaudhry, Project Manager, Planning.
Angie Martinez, Assistant Director with DOMI.
Kim Lucas, Director for DOMI.
Mike Malak, Municipal Traffic Engineer, DOMI.
Well, great. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having us. We're really excited and happy to be here to talk about the great work that the department has been doing. All of that work, of course, is in service of saving lives in the city of Pittsburgh. So for those who may not know, the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure, otherwise known as DOMI, one of the newer city departments, our mission is to provide the physical mobility and infrastructure so that the people of Pittsburgh have access to the social and economic mobility that they deserve. We do this by 5 primary goals. We want to make sure that nobody is seriously killed or seriously injured or killed just trying to get where they need to go on the streets of the city of Pittsburgh. We want to ensure that every household in Pittsburgh can access fresh fruits and vegetables within 20 minutes travel time of their home without requiring the use of a car. We want to make sure that all trips shorter than 1 mile are easy and enjoyable without a use of a car. We believe that no household should spend more than 45% of their household income on the combination of housing, energy, and transportation costs. And finally, we want to make sure that the streets of Pittsburgh, the design and the maintenance of them, reflect the pride and the values of the city of Pittsburgh. Today, you are going to hear the report out from the team on the work from the Complete Streets Advisory Group, the first, I believe, of our biannual reporting requirements. And you're going to hear some statistics about safety on the streets of Pittsburgh. I want to preface what you're about to hear with the reality that in the United States today, the trends for safety, especially for vulnerable road users, those are people that are getting around without cars, is not in a great state. Many cities like ours are investing daily in improving our roadways so that they're safe for everybody, especially people who are walking, biking, and using mobility devices. But we have a long way to go. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Assistant Director Angie Martinez.
Thank you, Director. We have quite a bit of material to share with you all today. We have about an hour of material divided into 3 sections. First, Jeff Leonard, who facilitates our Complete Streets Advisory Group, is going to make the Complete Streets Policy Biennial Report presentation to you. Next, Panini Chaudhry, who is our planning manager, is going to share with you our findings from our crash 10 analysis and our development of the high injury network. The high injury network is simply the identification and the mapping of the streets in our city where serious injuries and fatalities are happening at a greater frequency and with greater concentration. Finally, I'll return to share ideas and options based on best practices that we've seen in other cities that we as a city can use to advance complete streets and safe systems planning in Pittsburgh. We should have time, plenty, at the end for questions and discussion, and we have our director and municipal traffic engineer here as well to weigh in on that piece of the presentation to you. Slide. A little bit about how this presentation came to be. First, I want to acknowledge the work of the planning team who developed the content that you'll be seeing today. The data work was overseen by Panini, who many of you know as the person who leads many of our neighborhood planning and corridor studies within DOMI. And he was supported in the data work by planners Jeff Leonard, Kevin Brown, and our intern Lynn Yu. However, our presentation reflects the work of 117 employees that work for DOMI. As the director said, everyone in DOMI, from our right-of-way construction inspectors to our roadway engineers, contribute to the goal of making Pittsburgh streets as safe as possible. I also want to recognize the review and the vetting process of the information that you'll see presented here. Because we did this analysis in-house, we did take steps to have it reviewed by other Vision Zero cities and then also by an outside traffic consultant. We've also taken the opportunity to make this presentation to various groups that have provided us really valuable feedback in the iterations so that we are presenting what we believe is the most pertinent data in the most usable and impactful format. Some of the groups who have seen this presentation and weighed in on the development are our DOMI executive team, our DOMI staff members, members of the mayor's office, as well as our Complete Streets Advisory Group, some of whom are on the line and actually attending here in council today. So we want to thank everybody for their contributions to the report so far. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jeff Leonard to make the Complete Streets policy presentation.
Thanks, Angie. So we're going to start with the question, what is complete streets? Complete streets is a term to describe a road network designed for everyone, including pedestrians, people with disabilities, bicyclists, transit riders, motorists, and freight carriers. It's a holistic approach to making a city safer and healthier. Now we're going to talk about the history of complete streets in Pittsburgh and the advisory group. So in November 2016, the Complete Streets policy was adopted. In March of 2017, DOMI was established. In September of 2017, the first CSAG was established. In December of 2019, CSAG entered a state of hiatus. In 2021, the Pedestrian Safety Action Plan was adopted. In January 2022, Mayor Ed Gainey was elected. In April of 2022, Director Kim Lucas was appointed. And in October of 2023, the Complete Streets Advisory Group was reconvened, and we've had 2 meetings so far. And as Angie stated, the group has helped us with this report. The advisory group, we use the Engage page as a central hub for communication, where we have all of our documents and guiding documents and outline for what the group is responsible for. So reporting out for the Complete Streets policy, this report will include changes in travel behavior, projects in low to moderate income communities. In this presentation, we use the Federal Justice 40 designation to identify those low to moderate income communities. We're going to be talking about sidewalk projects, steps projects, bike lanes, bike racks, linear miles of bike lanes, and the number of projects. We're going to be looking at the number of pedestrian safety improvements and intersection upgraded to ADA compliance. The number and rate of pedestrian, bicycle, and vehicle crashes will be covered by Panini Chowdhury, as well as the before and after speeds for traffic calming. To begin with, we're going to be talking about motor vehicle trends. So nationally, the federal government projects that over the next 50 years, vehicle miles traveled will increase annually by 0.6%. Allegheny County observed an 8% decrease in actual VMT between 2019 and 2022. In regards to transit mode trends, Pennsylvania saw that 3% of the population takes transit to work, 9% of Pittsburgh's population takes transit to work, and PRT is reporting a 46% increase in bus ridership between 2021 and 2022. One key takeaway is that car-centric infrastructure is the most expensive to maintain, and we can't build our way out of congestion. 30% of households don't have access to a personal vehicle, and Pittsburghers take transit more than the state at large, and PRT again is reporting an increase in transit trips. Now we're going to be looking at bicycle mode trends. Between 2019 and 2022, bicycle trips increased by 27%. In this map here, you can see purple areas are decreasing, green areas are stable, and yellow areas are increasing. Stable areas or increasing areas are in the South Side Flats, Oakland, Bloomfield, Shadyside, and Morningside. What we've noticed is areas we are enhancing with new bicycle facilities are seeing an increase, and also that geography plays a role in bicycle mode trends. Now we're going to be looking at pedestrian mode trends between 2019 and 2022. Pedestrian trends, trips decreased by 34% in Pittsburgh. Again, you see here purple decreasing, green stable, and yellow increasing. Increasing areas of pedestrian trips are downtown, central Oakland, Upper Hill, and Squirrel Hill. Nationally, pedestrian trips are down 36%, statewide 33%, and in Pittsburgh down 34%. So here we're going to be talking a little bit about the Federal Justice 40 initiative. So this initiative we are using as a goal that 40% of overall benefits of certain federal investments flow to disadvantaged communities. We're using this as a benchmark to see how we do in providing improvements to the infrastructure in these J40 communities. Some of the criteria that is considered to designate a J40 neighborhood: transportation insecurity, environmental burden, social vulnerability, health vulnerability, climate and disaster risk burden. So here we have a map of the J40 communities in blue. 1 in 3 Pittsburghers live in these J40 communities. J40 communities represent 38% of the land in Pittsburgh, and 40% of the overall road network are inside these J40 communities. So again, we are using this as a benchmark to grade ourselves on our investments in these communities, and 40% is the number that we're looking for. So now we're looking at sidewalks. Between 2018 and 2023, there have been 26 sidewalk projects completed, totaling in 6.1 miles of restored sidewalk. Of those 26 projects, 86% of them, or 5.3 miles, were in the J40 neighborhoods. And here you have an image of Irvine Street and Otilia Street. City steps: between 2019 and 2021, there were 15 projects completed. 66% of the step projects were in J40 neighborhoods. In the city total, we have over 800 sets of steps. 45% of them are in J40 neighborhoods. Now we're looking at bike lanes. Between 2019 and 2023, DOMI completed 28 bicycle facility projects totaling 29 new miles of facility, and those 29 new miles serve 45% of the population. And now we'll take a look at bike racks. There are a total of over 1,400 total bike racks in the city. Since 2021, we've installed 457 new bike racks. That's a 46% increase over the last 3 years, and 26% of those new racks are in J40 communities. 18% of the new racks that have been installed are under 50 feet from a bus stop. And here we have a map of the completed projects between 2019 and 2023. The pink shape around the lines that you can see in the legend, that represents a half-mile network distance along the roadway. So within that shape is the portion of the population that have been served by these new bike lanes. 14% of these new facilities are in J40 areas and serve 11% of the total population. And now we're going to talk about traffic calming. Between 2019 and 2023, 55 projects have been completed. 54% of those projects are in J40 neighborhoods, and you can see those projects represented as pink lines on this map. And finally, we'll talk about intersection upgrades. Between 2019 and 2023, 54 signal projects have been installed. 6,000 ADA curb ramps have been installed, and 43% of these upgraded ramps are in J40 areas. In the city total, we have over 24,000 ADA detectable ramps, and in the city, we have 623 signalized intersections. So now I'm going to pass it over to Panini Chowdhury for the state of mobility crash trend analysis.
Thank you, Jeff. In the next section, we will try to achieve two goals. The first goal will be to understand the traffic safety issue that we have at our hand, which is identified as Complete Street Design Guidelines #1 goal. And the second thing is providing some background of the policy implication that Assistant Director Martinez will talk about in the next phase. All the data that will be presented here are collected from Pennsylvania Crash Information Tool. That's a PennDOT website. When they define the reportable crash, this definition came from Section 3746A of Title 75. It states that a crash is reportable if it involves injury to or death to any person and or damage to any vehicle to the extent that it cannot be driven under its own power, school bus crash, damage to PennDOT maintained property such as guardrails or signage. And when they define the non-reportable crash, they say that a non-reportable crash involves a crash with the injury or death of any, which does not result in an injury or death of any person, in which there is no towing due to the damage to the vehicle at the time of the crash. So as you can tell, the data that we'll be representing are only the data which has like a higher damage. Those are the only information available to us when it comes to the near misses, when it comes to the incidents where we have a non-motorized vehicle, like a pedestrian incident, but it doesn't result into an injury. Those are not the information you will be seeing today. The other thing to point out, you will find that all the information kind of end in 2022, though this presentation is in 2024. The reason is there is like a 16 to 18 month delay when the data get updated. Generally on June every year, the data from the past year get updated. So the 2023 data will be available somewhere around June this year. So that's why we have to end up in 2022. Next slide, please. So whenever we are talking about traffic safety, we actually have a crisis at our hand. Behind these statistics are the people, our friends, our families, our neighbor. And every crash has a ripple effect that touches countless lives, because when we are losing a soul from our society, that's not only that individual we are losing, all the family members, they are losing a little portion of them. The other individual who actually are responsible for that crash, what impact they're having in their lives. In the last 5 years, we lost around like 106 souls on our roadway, and 31 of them were walking or biking when they we lost them. When we compare with the national crisis like homicide and opioid crisis, between 2018 to 2022, the homicide incidents are up by 20% in the city, while the fatal crashes are up by 71%. My law enforcement agencies respond to 3.8 times more in traffic crashes than opioid crisis. So the crisis that we have in our hand, traffic safety, it is actually a public safety issue, and it is also a public health concern that we are dealing here. Next slide, please. So the fatal crashes are increasing at every level across the country, and Pittsburgh is no different. Between 2019 and 2022, nationwide, we have seen a 19% increase in fatal crash. In the Commonwealth, we have seen 12%, and for the city, it's around like a 4%. When you look into the fatal and the serious injury trend that we have in the city, in the last 10 years, we are seeing a pretty consistent increasing trend. If you look at the slide, in the chart that we have, we try to break it down by state road versus the city road. Some year, the city road has more crash versus the state road. But the thing is, regardless of the ownership, all these roads need serious attention. In 2023, the data that we have collected from our colleagues in public safety, we have 21 reported fatal crash in our roadways, and 7 of them are pedestrian crash. That means 1 in every 3 people we are losing here just because they are walking in our roadways. 1 in every 4, if you consider the 2018 to 2022 data, 1 in every 4 fatal crashes are pedestrian crashes. 31% of the fatal crashes are occurring in our J40 communities. And after the COVID, we are seeing another alarming trend that these fatal crashes in these J40 communities, they're up by almost 2 times than they used to be pre-COVID. Next slide, please. In the next slide, we want to talk a little bit about our vulnerable road user. By vulnerable road user, that means indicates that the crash incident, both a motor vehicle and a pedestrian convenience, that means wheelchair, scooter, skateboard, bicyclist, not including e-bike, and other pedal cycle that we have. Post-COVID, we are seeing a very alarming trend when it comes to the vulnerable road users. Overall, we are seeing a 39% increase in the vulnerable road user crashes. My bicycle crashes are up almost 110%. The pedestrian crashes are up 29%. When it comes to specifically for the Justice 40 communities, we are seeing a 46% increase in those crashes and in those communities. We also have seen a very solid relationship when it comes to the land use and the safety. What we have found is local neighborhood commercial and the Golden Triangle, that means the downtown, that represent roughly 4% of the city area that we have, but they are responsible almost 38% of the total pedestrian crashes that we are having in our city roadways. We also found that the Justice 40 and the transit-dominated communities like Homewood, Carrick, Hill District, Sheridan, Hazelwood, they are disproportionately bearing the impact of vulnerable road user crashes in our roadways. Next slide, please. So now that we kind of know the number, we try to figure out that what type of crashes are happening and where they are happening. So for that, we started to navigate it. And the first thing you need to understand that what type of crashes are happening in our roadway the most. Generally, 2 types of crash, angle crash and rear end crash, responsible more or less half of the total crash that are happening in our roadway. That means they mostly happen at the intersection. In fact, 6 out of every 10 crashes that happen in our city, they are intersection crash. When you look at the vulnerable road user, 2.5 times more crashes are happening in the intersection than the non-intersection locations. So when we started looking into the factors where how those crashes are happening, we saw some very alarming trend. We have seen that 24% increase when it comes to the aggressive driving and speeding related crashes at the intersection. We have seen a 39% red light running related crashes increase post-COVID in our intersection. When it comes to the vulnerable road user, we have seen 30% increase that the crashes are happening in our intersection post-COVID. We also wanted to look into the lighting condition that we have in our when the crashes are happening, and what we have seen that we have seen a 53% increase in high severity, that means fatal or serious injury crashes that are actually occurring in the nighttime. When we're looking at this type of contributing factor, it's kind of question that are these the ideal driver that we build our roadway for? Because before 2010, when we used to build the roadway and we were thinking about safety, all the idea was that driver will follow the rule of the road. So if you put the sign, if you put the signal, if you put the little green man with a flag, people probably will yell to slow down. But we kind of know that the green man doesn't have the Jedi power, and it doesn't do actually anything. What we are actually losing, that we forgot our fundamental reasoning as a society, that we were supposed to look after for each other. And especially post-COVID, what we are seeing that we are kind of losing that every day. And it's resulting in this type of number that we are seeing in our roadways. Next slide, please. So we also wanted to see that what's the situation beyond our jurisdiction. That means whether it's a state road, county road, or the city road, how we are doing as a city. State roads more or less represent 12% of the roadways that we have our city, but more or less they're responsible almost half of the crashes that are happening in our roadways. 5 of the top 10 high injury location that we have identified, we found that they are in the state-owned. So regardless of the ownership, it is very important that every corridor that we have, high crash corridor that we have, they deserve the same commitment to safety, because a life lost on a state route is no more or less precious than the one we lost in our city street. Next slide, please. So in the next slide, we will be talking about our high injury network. By high injury network is defined as a stretches of roadway where the highest concentration of collisions resulting in fatal or serious or minor or possible injuries occur on the transportation network. One of the basic reasons why we developed this HIN to ensure that our resource allocation is targeted. The decision making that we make is data driven to ensure equity in the safety decision making and also to ensure that build in public and political support. The HIN system that City of Pittsburgh developed, it's more of a proactive rather than reactive in nature. Most of the HIN that we have, you will find more common is kind of reactive in nature, but ours is a little bit different. It's more of a proactive, safe system focused methodology. I'll be happy to talk on that if the question comes in. What we are seeing in there, what we have seen that we have identified a total of 122 miles of roadway in our city, which can be considered as a high injury, which is roughly 10% of our roadway. We have identified total 111 individual corridor, 72 of them are city-owned, and 40% of those roadways are in the Justice for the communities. Only 1/10 of the total road network that we have identified are responsible for 62% of the total crash, 76% of the total fatal crash, 83% of the serious injury crashes, 79% of the total pedestrian crashes, and 62% of the bicycle crashes. Next slide, please. In the next slide, you will see a map of all the high injury network, and as you will see that it's pretty much sprawled all over the city, though the major concentration is in the eastern side. What we have seen that our collector and minor arterial road are the one who has the highest number and the mileage when it comes to the HIN network. Then we have our principal arterials, because we don't have a whole lot of them. That's why they came in at the third. And also a handful, 8 of the local road we have identified as a HIN. What we are doing is from 18 to 2022, we wanted to look into the amount of work we did on those HIN corridor. So it looks like we have DOMI did a number of projects, almost 95 projects on 43 segments of those HIN. Majority of them are traffic signal and the complete street projects. We also did a handful of traffic calming project, but as you all know, the traffic calming program was more geared to the neighborhood local street. So all this high crash corridor actually didn't get the benefit from that funding that we are allocating on the neighborhood traffic calming section. We also did one critical sidewalk gap program on those HIN. Next slide, please. So until now, I kind of give you all the bad news that kind of question you that all this money we are spending, where it is going, whether it's why we are not seeing it. So we wanted to spend some time to better understand what's happening, the countermeasure that we are providing in our roadway, whether they're doing a good job or what's missing, why we are not seeing that in the data that we are reviewing. That's why we wanted to look into 2 programs that's like the most common. The first one is the Kardashian program of DOMI, the most popular, overhyped, but I feel like often misunderstood, because we have to spend more time to kind of explain that what type of content we cannot provide through our that traffic calming program that we can do. And the other program is our traffic signal program, which actually have the most of the resource and the stuff and the work we do, but oftentimes kind of feel like people don't understand that benefit they're bringing to the society. If you look at the traffic calming treatment from 18 and 2022, from 2019 more or less, we have those projects in. We are seeing on average 7-mile reduction in the speed of all the program that we are doing, and also we are seeing on average 55% reduction in the driving of the speeding behavior. So this program are absolutely bringing the benefit that we are looking for. The second thing is the traffic signal. Those are a little bit more the expensive portion. They go around like a 450 to 500,000 per signal, but also they bring a lot of benefit. When we look into the signal replacement that we have in our roadways, more or less we are seeing a 33% reduction in overall crashes whenever we are doing the signal replacement. Also, whenever we are doing the signal replacement, we are actually ensuring that that signal is accessible to and for all. What does it mean by that? So whenever we are doing the signal improvement, we are adding component like curb extension that kind of makes sure that it's narrow the road. It comes with the ADA ramp in there. It's shortening the ped crossing. While at the same time, when we are talking about the ped enhancement, those pedestrian signal feature, they comment like audible push button, countdown pedestrian signal, vibrotactile arrow walk indication. So regardless of your ability, if you have any kind of limitation when it comes to the visual or auditory, our signals have those components already built in to ensure that you are safe. So this type of program, they basically do three types of things. Either they try to reduce the kinetic force that has been transferred from the car to the human body. That's our traffic calming program does. They try to separate the VRU from the motor vehicle by time. That's what the signals does. And through our Complete Street project, we try to separate the space. That means separate by the vulnerable road user from the motorist through a dedicated facility. And so what we are seeing is these facilities are bringing the benefit that we were hoping it will bring, but the problem is the scale and where we are putting it. Comparing the need that we have at our hand, we are simply not deploying it as comprehensively we wanted to. So though the locations we're putting the benefit, it's bringing the benefit, it's improving the safety, but in overall, we are lacking with the amount of infrastructure we needed to put in there. So the overall results still coming in the red, in the negative. Next slide, please. So what we can do about it. So that's where this safe system approach comes into play. The safe system approach has origin in Sweden through its Vision Zero program and with the Sustainable Safety program in Netherlands. So these two countries are the forerunner when it comes to the safe system approach. New York and Chicago, they're the early adopter of Vision Zero in the United States. The basic philosophy of Vision Zero safe system approach is it's a journey that is the most important, that's destination. We all want zero, but at the same time, when we are moving towards zero, we need to set up a system which is concrete and sustainable enough that can keep that zero number or keep that number surrounding and close by. The major responsibility shifted to the design and the policymaker rather than the individuals. So the safe systems approach is telling that when we are designing our roadway, we have to be proactive and ensure that it's safe. And the policy that we are putting in towards the safety, it has to be ensured that this multimodal is making benefit to everyone. And also the third thing that the philosophical point of view safe system approach try to approach is it needs to be multi-layered, comprehensive. So one of the layers, if it looks like it failed, the other layer will pick it up. What does it mean by that? If you look at this graph that we have here, there are total 6 fundamental principles we have for safe system approach. The first thing is we kind of have to all come into an agreement that death and serious injury, these are unacceptable regardless of the situation. How you will do it, the first two things, you have to accept that human make mistake, so your system needs to have that capability to kind of merge that mistake people make, and humans are vulnerable. So you have to make sure that we are creating a system which kind of take out those kinetic force out of the roadway so that even if you get into a crash, it won't result into a high injury or fatality. How you will do it. So your safety needs to be proactive, and your system needs to have redundant component in there so that if one of the component fail, the other component kind of picks in and kind of help in. And then comes the most important portion, which is responsibility is shared, but not equal. The thing is, the type of improvement you can do through the design, whether it comes to the safer speed, safer road, or the policy legislation, the safer vehicle, probably won't bring the same amount of benefit if we kind of focus on the safer people. That means you are walking with a high-vis vest as a user of the roadway so that you can be more visible in the nighttime. But if I don't have a good sidewalk and the car hits you, high-vis ain't gonna save you. So first, we have to make sure that my infrastructure in place. We have to make sure my policy recommendations are in place to enforce that. and then maybe that safer people component gets more visible and more effective. I'm happy to answer more questions if it comes in, but now I want to move over to the policy implications section led by Assistant Director Martinez.
Thank you. I'll be talking next about the options that we have available to us based on best practices for how we can actually implement some of these safe system goals and complete streets policy if we really want to be serious about roadway safety. You'll hear me repeat a lot of the statistics that Panini just shared, and that's purposeful because we're intending to inform the policy directives from what the data is telling us will have the most value. Slide. So first, we'll be talking about project selection and how this information can better inform that. The day one benefit of having the high injury network mapped is that it gives DOMI direction on where our transportation dollars can do the most good for safety. 83% of serious crashes and 76% of fatal crashes are happening on 10% of streets. These are the streets that we need to prioritize for capital budget improvements, grants, inclusion in our regional transportation improvement plan, and other investments. We also need to recognize that our project selection should reflect that it is unacceptable that fatal crashes are twice as high in J40 areas and that crashes involving vulnerable road users have increased 39% post-COVID. We have to prioritize our safety interventions in communities that have higher environmental, social, and health vulnerabilities and have less transportation and mobility options in addition to that. Regardless of mode or where somebody lives, everybody should have the same freedom of movement and expectation of safety when moving through our city. While there were some startling statistics presented here, there's also been encouraging findings. We know that our traffic calming program works. We've seen that where we install these improvements, average vehicle speeds decreased by 7 miles per hour and the number of vehicles speeding reduced by 55%. We need to scale up our traffic calming program to be on more than just residential streets. 2024, I'm happy to say, will be the first year that DOMI is going to install quick build traffic calming treatments like speed tables on a higher order arterial street. Greenfield Avenue is on our high injury network, but has been ineligible for the neighborhood traffic calming program because it is an arterial non-residential street. This project will be a great learning opportunity for DOMI to scale up what we know works on residential streets to higher volume streets where the crashes and injuries are happening with greater frequency and also with more devastating outcomes. Slide. We can also scale up our successes by making sure that safety is the standard. That can look like finding ways to leverage our existing spending on maintenance to install low-cost or quick-build treatments. That can look like us using our paving budget or our pavement marking restoration budget to install things like bump outs and pedestrian islands where it just makes sense and where it improves safety to do so. The majority of our crashes are happening at intersections. Our traffic group is always looking for opportunities to use best practices and proven countermeasures to make our intersections safer and more predictable through simple signal timing techniques such as leading pedestrian intervals or using a pedestrian recall. These are low to no cost improvements that show improvements to safety. They make the intersection safer and more predictable, and they also create a more friendly pedestrian environment. I know that our municipal traffic engineer would be happy to elaborate on these and other practices that we can get to scale when we get into the discussion. The National Association of Transportation Officials, otherwise known as NACTO, has published urban design guidelines. DOMI already uses these design guidelines as a reference, but many other cities, especially those that are very serious about roadway safety, have successfully adopted these to be used alongside the MUTCD and the AASHTO manual to ensure that street design prioritizes the safety of vulnerable road users and is reflective of an urban and multimodal environment. The MUTCD is just the guidance document guiding decisions about pavement markings and signs, and AASHTO is the recognized roadway design manual. DOMI wants to work with our partners in public safety and at PennDOT to explore using NACTO guidelines where appropriate in our city. We should also take steps to adapt our existing city processes to make sure that improvements that other people outside the city might be making into our streets or into our public realm are done so around safety. An example of that might be working with developers and creating a policy whereby if you're doing development and public realm improvements along the HIN, that we're working with DOMI to make sure that any improvement in the public space is centered around safety and not just aesthetics. Next slide. Collaboration is essential to aligning our resources so that they have the most impact. But how? First, by what we're doing today and the work that we've done to get here. DOMI will continue to make space to speak to our residents, advocates, and other groups about safety and equity in a way that they can shape the work, including through our Complete Streets Advisory Group. These conversations have been pivotal to us being here today to go on record so that no one can say that they don't know about the severity or the inequity of safety on our streets. We also need to make sure that we're tracking and reporting on outcomes of our efforts. And so we look forward to presenting similar presentations like this in the future. I'm also happy to say that our Complete Streets Advisory Group Engage page has been updated to have this report published in an interactive version of the HIN so that it's readily available to anyone in the public. An essential part of safety work relies on a shared commitment of safety and breaking down silos that might exist between departments or agencies that will be called to take action to support roadway safety. Part of how we can do this is by forming an interdepartmental working group with Mayor's Office, Public Safety, DOMI, of course, and others who might be called to take that action. It's important that we understand what our separate responsibilities are, but that we're using our collective resources in order to pull in the same direction of safety. We've presented to you a lot of data today, and data we know is powerful, but we know that better data gives better direction. So we want to work with Department of Public Safety and our partners at PennDOT to improve consistency and timeliness of crash reports so that we continue to inform our project, policy, and funding decisions on the best and the most complete data. As Panini said, there are certain restrictions in how what is defined as a reportable crash, and also opportunities to potentially capture near misses so that we're taking the most proactive approach that we can to roadway safety in our city. 5 out of 10 of our highest injury crash corridors are state-owned. We know that meaningful work addressing roadway safety is going to involve us being lockstep with our state partner at PennDOT and our Metropolitan Planning Organization, SPC. We are optimistic that the relationships that DOMI and the city have built with these organizations over the years, as well as some of the initial conversations that we've had with them on the backs of this analysis and other safe systems learning, will result in safer streets in the city, regardless of who the facility owner is. We've talked a little bit about Vision Zero today, and that is the goal of reducing roadway fatalities and severe injuries to zero. One of the tenets of Vision Zero is that there is something to be learned from every single roadway fatality. Many Vision Zero cities convene a crash response group within 48 hours of a fatal crash in order to make sure that these incidents are discussed in a timely and holistic fashion. Not just with public safety or first responders, but also with traffic engineers and other people that may need to be at the table to understand what went wrong. What we learn and how it gets applied may be the difference between somebody getting home safely versus somebody not getting home at all. Last slide. Up to now, we've presented more or less strategies and tools that are available to the city to use in the near term. However, there are some strategies and policy interventions that we can seek that take a little bit more time, but can have incredible safety benefits. Folks here on council know that Pennsylvania is a Dillon's rural state. What that means is that municipalities like Pittsburgh can only exercise regulatory powers that have been given to us by the state. This matters because certain changes to our roadway design or enforcement strategies, such as implementing curbside protected bike lanes or automated enforcement for speeding, require state action for us to legally pursue these in the city. It's not right, it's not wrong, it's just a necessary part of the regulatory framework that it's important for people to understand. Automated enforcement can be used to make our streets safer without compromising personal safety. Pittsburgh already has state authorization to use automated red light enforcement, otherwise known as ARLI, on our city streets. But we know that there's more work to be done to make this program a reality. And again, going back to collaboration. DOMI can do the data work to identify the locations where red light enforcement is going to have the greatest safety benefit. But we need our partners from public safety, INP, OMB, and others to help us understand what it takes to procure, install, and maintain this system sustainably. Additionally, we have to make sure that we remain accountable to the public as we pursue these new arenas of enforcement so that they are done equitably and entirely in the pursuit of safety. Aggressive driving is increasing and speeding is up post-COVID. Higher driving speeds lead to greater crash rates and more severe outcomes. Being serious about roadway safety means being serious about speeding. And that's why DOMI wants to do a legislative and legal review of our ability to enact citywide speed limit changes. This can be centralized around specific zones, such as commercial areas where we're seeing that there are a great number of crashes due to speeding, or around schools, parks, other areas of interest. We understand that because of this legal framework, there are going to be steps to us actually getting there, but it certainly is a tool. Finally, funding. The magnitude of need and the funding needed to address the issue will not come overnight. A predictable dedication of resources for our program budgets for things like traffic calming, sidewalk repair, safe routes to school, and even paving, whether through local dollars or grants, will help us plan for the future and confidence, knowing that we'll be able to have the resources in line to actually implement these strategies when the time comes. Next slide. And finally, we'll end with this photo from our Safe Routes to School Walk and Roll to School Day. Twice a year for the past 3 years, our Safe Routes to School coordinator has organized a Bike and Roll to School Day. This is an event where school administrators, teachers, parents, public safety, elected officials, and others partner to promote the vision that children, who are arguably our most vulnerable residents, have the ability, or should have the ability, to travel safely, securely, and independently in our city streets. We hope that this presentation leaves you with the feeling that there is something that all of us can do to make our streets safer, not just 2 days out of the year, but every single day. We're optimistic that today marks just the beginning of many conversations, and we look forward to our collective action and any questions or discussion. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you all so much. So I will open up the floor. We'll start with, I should also mention Councilman Charlin has also joined us. Anyone else? No, I think that's it. So, oh, she was? Okay, well, in any case, so yeah, Councilwoman Strasburger, you want to start?
Thank you, Councilwoman Warwick, and I just want to thank you for hosting this post-agenda. This has been incredibly helpful. Thank you to everyone who presented, and on behalf of, I think you said 150?
117.
117. You wish it was 100. We all wish it was 150. 117 hardworking people at DOMI and the advisory group and everyone who helped pull this together. That was a lot of data. It was really helpful to understand where we are, sort of a state of the state, and I do have a few questions. I'll start with the definition of a crash. And I know that is somewhat restricted, and how we use it is restricted by, how it's defined, like, as you mentioned, it has to meet certain criteria of injury or towing of a car, that sort of thing. And I'm really glad that we're looking at, a crash response group to then be able to dedicate, an immediate sort of, have an immediate look at what that intersection or what precipitated that crash. But it also seems like there's a whole lot of data that we're missing by not accounting for near misses, not accounting for crashes that don't result in terrible injury, right? And what if we had that, well, we know we have the data, but what if we were able to harness that data and help help determine where our interventions, even the quick fix interventions, happen based on that. It does seem like we have access to that data, or the potential to have access to the data, and I just wanted to give you the opportunity to respond to, how we might be able to pull it all together and use it.
Thank you, Councilperson, for the question. So we do have some of those near-miss incident data access through our 311 system. So whenever we do our work in-house or identification of the project or even at the design phase, we try to leverage those data. But the problem is when you are talking about those reportable crashes, we don't necessarily see a lot of information from there. I'm happy to share some of those examples to you all. The amount of information our officers receive on the field and the amount of information we can actually see in the platform is probably 1/6 or 1/7 of that. And that is the reason, as Director Martinez was pointing out, that we probably need to have a better system with our friends in the public safety so that we kind of harness those data and better understand those crashes are happening. When it comes to the proactive nature in attacking all these crashes, besides 311 system, thanks to our partner, regional partner Southwestern Pennsylvania Commission, we have access to a platform. It's called Streetlight. It's basically location-based data. This is a next generation database. So you have access to a lot of information that kind of help you create an educated guess. If the crash happened, probably every day folks are moving this way, probably it might result it into that specific crash. Sometimes we make those assumptions also when we do the analysis. And lastly, we are working at this moment with INRIX IQ. It's a 6-month pilot period. We are working with them. So they also have a lot of connected vehicle data available. So say, for example, a connected vehicle was going in, suddenly he did a rough break. We kind of see those information. So for the 6 month, we have access to those type of data that we are using, but it's probably for the long term, we don't. So when we're thinking about the long term, making sure that how we can encourage more of our residents to participate in the 311 so that we don't miss out those near-miss incidents, and figuring out how we can have a more collaborative partnership with our public safety friends to kind of see that if they are willing to collect a little bit more information rather than this typical reportable crash definition that the state put it for us.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And to that, I just want to acknowledge that this is not an issue that is unique to Pittsburgh. This is something that, we're seeing in the industry, is just that getting access to that data is difficult. It takes intention. It takes getting people in the room and changing the way systems are done.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Okay. And it seems like we can harness the power of, just our community partners as well to be able to make it really easy to report. I know 311 is going to be changing soon. Hopefully that makes a difference, but also there are amazing community members out there who can help us with this too. Okay. It's just so disheartening to hear that. I've been working on these issues for 10 years, and it seemed like we were making improvements. It seemed like we were making our roadways safer for vulnerable users, and to see, it's not like I've heard this for the first time today. We've been reading the articles that ever since the beginning of the lockdown portion of COVID, and then since then, injuries and deaths from crashes on roadways have increased severely. Dangerous driving has increased across the country. It's like a nationwide epidemic. And in that vein, I wonder what you've learned. Okay, so clearly, we're doing all we can. We're doing kind of all we can with the money we have on the engineering piece of it, on making our roadways safer, and I think we'll be able to prioritize more on that with this work you're doing. We have a long way to go on enforcement, and we have a long way to go on kind of just public education and awareness. So on that piece, I'm wondering what you've learned from cities who have done it well, if there are any, in replicating this as a public health campaign, as a successful public health educational campaign. I think of seatbelts. I think of children riding bikes wearing helmets. Those are successful public health campaigns. What can we learn from other cities in this way to replicate it, and what will work for Pittsburgh, do you think? So this is the hardest part, is changing culture, right? Changing cultures within departments, within the city workers, but also just within people who are with like the public at large.
Director?
You're right. I don't know that we have seen, and if the team has heard of a place that's really solved entirely for the public health element, we haven't seen that yet, but you're absolutely right. The personal responsibility angle of how these crashes are involved. The reality is, over the last number of years, vehicles on our streets have gotten heavier, they've gotten taller, they've gotten safer for the occupants. And when you feel safe driving your vehicle, then that makes you feel a bit invincible, we believe. And that might mean that you're driving that vehicle differently because no longer do you have that fear of personal risk and injury. So you're absolutely right. I think of the Stop Smoking campaign. That was definitely nationwide and that had everybody behind it. And you're right that we need to see that here.
I'd also add that the Complete Streets Advisory Group, having that group available as a sounding board, and then, this idea that we can do an interdepartmental working group, that's the sort of capacity building that I think has to happen in order for people to think differently and take individual actions. The other thing I want to note is that the city of Pittsburgh partnered with SPC and the county in last year's USDOT SS4A grant application, and we were actually awarded a grant to do some action planning and safe systems work within our region. So we're really excited about that because we're actually getting federal dollars to do the work, but then we're also going to be partnering with those other agencies which are really so vital. It can't work in silos. It's all of us. Panini?
I can probably summarize all the information that we receive. So there is a model going on. They call it Health Impact Pyramid Model. So the goal of that model was to kind of relate that when it comes to the public health issue, how it kind of relate with the traffic safety. That was the goal of that study. So what that study kind of figure out that when it comes to the national crisis like this, Councilwoman, you are talking about, individual effort does play a role, absolutely. But if you really want to solve the problem, you have to be the population health impact, like everybody's socioeconomic factor needs to come into play. So when they put it out like a pyramid, the top two notion is education and active measure, like you were saying. Education awareness work, but it will work as long as people are following it. Signage work as long as people are following it. So we are kind of relying on the individual to make the right call. That unfortunately we are seeing they are not making it a whole lot. So that's where the next portion of the measure comes in. They call it latent safety measure and built environment. What does it mean by that? Since individual responsibility is not giving us the result that we are looking for, probably we kind of have to create some passive intervention, like Assistant Director was talking about lead pedestrian interval. So you are in a car, even if you want to, you won't be able to move now. You have to wait 3 to 5 seconds to give that pedestrian the access. Indirectly, we are doing it. While at the same time, built environment is the direct intervention, like a speed hump or table. No matter how speed you want to go, you have to slow down. We have to put those interventions in it. But if we really want to see the result of like a zero fatality, really safe neighborhood, we have to hit the socioeconomic factor. We have to create our land use in such a way where people don't even feel the necessity to drive. So we have to focus more on our transit-oriented development type of work. We have to make sure that our transit is more frequent, my bike facility is more abundant, that people don't even feel the necessity to drive those, which kind of create those safety issues. As Director pointed out, Hoboken, New Jersey, they are a Vision Zero community from 2018 to until now. It's a very small community, like close to 70,000 or something. What's working for them, it's a very basic treatment. They call it intersection daylighting. We do it all over the place. You will see the painted. We kind of make sure that people don't park close to 20 feet. We do it. But the thing is, that scale they are doing, we are not on that scale. And the second order of the problem is they have a very, very better public transit system that they can rely on that we don't necessarily have in all the neighborhood. Mm-hmm. So if we really want to move to that zero number, it will take a lot more than just the infrastructure. Infrastructure is part of it, but we have to think more of a socioeconomic factor that we are doing. Individual responsibility does play a role, but at the end of the result is a public emergency, and it needs to be tackled through that.
Yeah, like if we can give every single person in the city a less than 10-minute walk to some sort of public transportation option, whether it's an e-bike rental or whether it's a bus or a T, then that will
Absolutely.
change. And it'll also make us a healthier city.
Yes.
Getting back to public health, like we will all be healthier for walking those 10 minutes or whatever it is. So
Like we can do the campaign as much as we want, but the sad reality is if you go to the West Pittsburgh, if you go to the South Hill, my transit system is infrequent. I live in a neighborhood where after 6 or 7 o'clock, it's like a once in every hour transit comes in. So though I'm an avid transit user, after 7 o'clock, I don't use it anymore. So I'm become a motorist on that time. So we have to create our city in such a way so that we don't have to make those choices. The choice will be there for us to become non-motorized. That should be the ultimate goal as a region and also as a city we should move forward with.
thank you so much. I have one last question. Do we have the power legislatively as a city to institute a citywide ban on right-hand turns on red, to ban that? Rather than intersection by intersection?
I actually don't know the answer to that question.
So I
Do you?
don't know the answer to that either. In terms of if there's a policy that would, I also don't know. So what I would say is that I don't know if we can do that. I think we would still have to go through the steps of posting signs. 1 traffic signal, 4 approaches, 4 signs. So functionally, I think it'd be better than not doing that. I don't think it would change my operations a ton. And what I will also say is the language is fairly relaxed in terms of when you can prohibit turn on red. One of the criteria is unacceptable amount of pedestrian conflicts. There's no number, there's no quantity to that. And so to me, 95 or more of our intersections in the city where we have crosswalks, there has been an unacceptable amount of pedestrian conflicts. So, and this is something I'll touch on during the press conference later, to me, I don't think we are gonna be posting that more, regardless of city policy, but I think it's worth looking into for sure.
Great. Thank you. That's my questions for now. Thank you.
Yeah, I have a couple questions, and unfortunately I have to leave early for another meeting, but thank you for your time. My first question is, understanding that most of the traffic calming interventions have been done, if not all, on, smaller, residential streets, and I know you touched on briefly Greenfield Avenue. Could you break down what, interventions can be used on the higher volume streets to give us a kind of a bigger picture of the things that we can do on the so-called non-residential roads?
It's very context specific. Everyone's has strong feelings about speed humps. When you make a decision to put a speed hump on the road, you have to take into account emergency access route, PRT route. We have tested out different types of speed humps, ones that are more compatible with larger vehicles. And it's really, I can't give you a great specific answer because a lot of it depends on also how many thousand of vehicles you have. Like Greenfield, I think, is somewhere in the 6,000 to 8,000. I'm looking at you, Panini. But so you can be a little more aggressive with your calming than you can on, say, a 13 to 20,000. And in that case, you're probably going away from calming and more towards intersection safety. Very, very depending on your context.
All right, thank you. My next question is around interventions that could be done on the state roads. Obviously, that was a big issue, and when we met, most recently, I brought up the section of Penn Avenue in my district that splits North and South Point Breeze between Fifth Avenue and Braddock Avenue. So what types of steps that we can take, working collectively, with DOMI as well as with the elected officials, as well as reaching out to our state representatives and state senators, and other state officials to get PennDOT to understand the importance of trying to figure out traffic calming, interventions, on these state roads that they may classify as highways, but we know, very much, I have a 14-year-old and a 12-year-old, And, we live in North Point Breeze. I live a block from Penn Avenue, and we're always, really waiting at bated breath to make sure if they're going, into East Liberty or, headed to the JCC to make sure, when they cross Penn Avenue at Dallas or, at Fifth Avenue, they're getting across safely because we know it is dangerous. So do you have any thoughts about the type of advocacy that we could do collectively, as a coalition to push PennDOT to take this more seriously and understand, really the danger that's posed on the state roads within our city?
I can take that one. So I think the great news is that locally PennDOT District 11, who we work with, has been signaling to us that they are ready to do things a little differently. They are willing and ready partners to work with our department, and I think everybody at the table can attest to sort of the evolution of that relationship. And so we are really looking forward to see what that brings. Historically, we have had, and Mike may be able to touch on this a little bit more, oversight to some of the elements of those roads. Even though they're state roads, we're responsible for the signals, we're responsible for the pavement markings and the signage. Things historically that they have not allowed us to do are things like speed humps and speed bumps. But we do believe that in partnership with them that we can continue to try new things. We're looking at examples in other parts of Pennsylvania, for example, like Philadelphia, where they've been able to try things on some PennDOT roadways. I think the advocacy that the team was talking about earlier about things within state law that could be changed, for example, automated speed enforcement and things of that nature, the parking protected bike lanes, I think those would really go a long way for encouraging not only our district to allow us to do more of these progressive tactics to slow people down and to make our streets safer, but also in empowering us to do our work. And then I don't know if you all had anything you wanted to add.
Councilman, the only thing I will add, as Director was saying, the State Road is high traffic corridor. So whenever we are working in there, we try to make sure that we are putting permanent amenities in there rather than a flex post at low cost like you will see near Cali Street. So that also add up a lot of cost. That's where one of the reason we feel like it's really important that we are partnering with our states and they kind of realize, because that financial burden will also be a very important part whenever we are dealing with the state routes, because those will be more expensive project than what the project we are doing in our city streets.
Thanks. And my last question is specific around state policy. You kind of laid out a menu of different state policy things, and as the spouse of a former state legislator, I know that things kind of take their time. In Harrisburg, is there one particular state policy you think that we should really focus on first in the near term as collaborators to try to get change, to give DOMI and the city power?
Sure. So I will tell you that the top three from my team are the automated speed enforcement. So Philadelphia has piloted that on Roosevelt, and they have seen dramatic reductions in speed and improved safety. And so being given the permission at the state level to do that within our city would be really game changing. Of course, it would require some amount of local changes as well. The parking protected bike lane, we have advocates in the audience today and at this table that really want to make sure that that type of infrastructure that you see in cities all over the United States, and that means that you can have safe places for people to bike and have parking, which is a better buffer than a flex post. Let's make that legal to do here. And then finally, and I'm afraid to say it, but I'm going to say it because we saw 1 million people move on them, but e-scooters are still hanging out there, the legalization of those. So they do have some crashes related with them, but when you look at it from a data standpoint, and you saw that 1 million people in the city of Pittsburgh were able to get around 1 million times rather without cars, that also increases safety for other people on our roadway. And so making sure that access to multimodal options is one that we continue to see the benefit in.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Could I add something, Councilman?
Go ahead.
For me, anything automated is number one. I want to mention that the revenue from these go towards infrastructure improvements. We don't want to make money off this. We want people to be safe. The city of Philadelphia alone generates approximately $13 million a year. They receive half of it, and the rest of it is distributed across the state. The more municipalities that bring these technological interventions to bear. One, in a perfect world, we're making no money off it because people are no longer speeding and no longer running red lights. PennDOT specifically, their program that distributes this money, they prioritize safety. It's a safety program first and foremost. And so the city has benefited from it financially, and I think it's important to note that.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for your presentation.
Councilwoman Gross.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate so much being here in this presentation and the work that I see you having moved forward now. This has been a lot of work moving forward, kind of where are the data on the ground from the maps and the data that you've collected versus the kind of costs and effectiveness of the various strategies. But also where as you are putting in the kind of like social data of the populations in need. And because we hear a lot of comment being city council, that's what we're here for. I just want to remind the public that this is not this is like the people's table. This is not the cars table. This is not the car owners table. And so we're here to talk about what the people need in order to get the things that they need on a daily basis, in order to thrive, in order to get to the places they need to get to, whether that's school or work or to the grocery store. And so I want to talk a little bit about what we have mapped here, and I think it's a good start, but it just made me have like more questions. So the targeting and the framing of a vulnerable population with the J40 map. Can we put it back up, maybe? So I read, and I've got it on my phone too. Thank you to the clerk's staff who already emailed it to us so I could kind of zoom in myself. Those households that don't have access to a car. I just want to remind everybody that no children drive cars. So even if those households have cars, I don't care if those households have 5 cars, none of those children drive cars. And they're still having to get to their school bus stop, even if they're bused to school. They're still having to, many of them are walking to school, and they are going to the Port Authority bus stops. God knows my kids, are on the bus all the time. And so we need to, I almost want to kind of see a density map of where there are kids in the city to see how that overlaps. And similarly, I would be remiss if I didn't also kind of shout out the work of Age Friendly Pittsburgh, who do such a good job. There are many, many seniors who maybe drove for their life, maybe didn't drive, and who are no longer driving. And we want them to be able to stay in their neighborhoods to age in place. And so I'm really curious about that too. When I first moved into my first house in Bloomfield 20-some years ago, there was a line out the door at Donatelli's every morning because a lot of the women in the neighborhood shopped every day at Donatelli's. That's where they went. And they walked there. And many of my neighbors at the time, now I represent Bloomfield, but it's changed a lot, had never had a driver's license. And so, I think we can add to that data. Because what really jumped out at me when I first looked at it was I am not in the J40 areas, in the neighborhoods that I represent. I have historic walkable neighborhoods. Almost, 80 to 90% of my district are trolley car neighborhoods. So I feel like that's why people choose to live in the neighborhoods that I represent. They're very walkable, so there's main streets and little shops, and there's really mixed use kind of everywhere. But there is a lot. I probably have 10 miles of high injury network. And so I'm wondering how you're going to comport those maps. How do those work in the prioritization?
So one thing I can share, and I'm you're talking about older residents and younger residents, and I will say we didn't cover it here, but when we're prioritizing projects, especially traffic calming, we are looking at pedestrian generators, trip generators, as a way to help prioritize our work. And so we are looking at the location of schools and rec centers, which often are co-located with senior centers, parks, access to retail as things, because high injuries can come with the high number of pedestrians. They're there. Our pedestrian safety action plan from a number of years ago also helped identify some of those predictive measures. So things like transit, which makes sense. Everybody's a pedestrian before they use any other mode of transportation. Mm-hmm. And so it makes sense in those communities that you might see higher injuries because that's where there's more vulnerable users. And so that is the way that we are using that data to identify places that need us to invest sooner than maybe a couple other locations.
And we've talked about it many times, but I would like to see the transit, as in Port Authority Transit, be added to with the school bus network, which I know is chaotic because any child could be going to any school. And so it's completely diffused. If the listeners, again, if you didn't know that, there's a lot of the city where the children in the neighborhood are not going to the neighborhood school. And the neighborhood school is receiving children from all over the city, or vice versa. So that building that you see is not really a neighborhood serving school. And so we have to really think about that. I also, again, maybe we can speak to it today, or maybe not. When I see maps like we have on the screen that are based on a percent, I always want to double check, like percent of households that are without a car, or percent of households that have some of the other vulnerability scales. I always recall our kind of struggle here at council over, for example, CDBG allocations, and just because of our brief background, right? We were told one year that we couldn't give any money from the CDBG pot to any of the census tracts that had less than 50% low and moderate income neighborhoods. And there was a lot of we had a lot of a robust debate around that, because that meant that you could give CDBG funding to neighborhoods that had, 300 residents, but were 50% low and moderate income. So 150 low and moderate income households in the census tract. But you were not allowed to allocate a single penny of those dollars to a census tract that had 2,000 residents that was 49% low and moderate income. And so, like 900 low and moderate income people were kept away from those pot of funds. And so I always want to look at absolute density, which you have in your I noticed the high impact, the high injury network is in absolute numbers. But the targeting maps areas are by percentages of social factors, I think. So I just would love to see a comparison. Again, it doesn't have to be public or anything like that. I would like us to just kind of look and see those absolute numbers, because the inverse is true. And I'm sorry, Councilman Kahari Mosley left, but I kind of surround Garfield, right? So I share the Penn Avenue network with him, and we split, half and half around Mossfield and Black Street, and I kind of pick up again on the East Liberty side, and that's in the J40 network, and there's nothing in the high injury network except for maybe a little bit of Penn Avenue. So I'm just wondering how we're going to comport these, and especially if we look at them through the lens of age for both seniors and children, and we add. I always like to point out that we should look at things from a gendered equity lens too, a gendered lens, and I'm not sure if I can see that. You may have folded it in somehow. I would really like to see that, because I believe this is based on older data, but 70% of our households in poverty are female-headed households with children in the home, and most of or all of those didn't really have a vehicle in the home too. So they're really high users, and they're being forced because of housing prices to more and more mobility challenged areas of the city, and food deserts, et cetera, childcare deserts, et cetera, et cetera. So I think I would love some time digging a little farther into that. I noticed that the tools that have been tested now in various iterations on various kinds of streets that we want to invest more on don't include some things, where we know I think you could say all of the injuries are being caused by motorized vehicles, right? I didn't see banning cars on streets in anything. Just saying, right? So we have a very changing network now. Right now, downtown, today, right this minute, at 11:36 a.m. of this Monday morning, is 70% vacant. So it's not the same rush hour that it used to be. And I would love to see some traffic counts on that. There's just no way. I can't remember the last time I heard like a traffic report on the radio. It used to be everything. There'd be helicopters flying, and it was updated about. And I'm just convinced, and I don't have the data, right? Our arterials, which we're now shifting into, so we focused on residential. Right now, we're going to move into those arterials. Those arterials are having a different traffic demand than they used to. The hospitals, that's still consistent, right? I live close enough to, and use Bigelow enough and represent some of Bigelow, where I know that like that kind of traffic rush hour in and out of Oakland on the hospital shifts is consistent. You're not working remote if you work at a hospital. So Oakland may be one thing, but downtown, I'm sorry, the traffic has had to have dropped 70% every day. Those parking garages are 70% empty, and those offices. The leases haven't completely fallen off, but everybody's working hybrid on different days, so we know that that's a problem, and it has to have impacted our traffic count. So we were just chatting the other day about like whether some of our 4-lane arterials could just like drop a lane. That would certainly change and allow us more space, right? We also have not talked about limiting weight limits, which we know we need to talk about because of bridges and things like that. So what about the arterials as well? And again, just so the public doesn't panic, that street will last twice as long with less heavy vehicles on it. So that allows us some money in our budget that we desperately need as well. I think we might allow us to dream a little too about the job, as you articulated very well at the outset, really is to make sure that people can get where they need to go. And if their traffic patterns are changing, I'm just reminded that, since we haven't really, our work hasn't changed, and I still have, all of us have, and every city has so many more people working at home. They're going to their local restaurant for lunch. And they used to all be here downtown or all in Oakland. And those local eateries weren't seeing a lunch crowd walking in the same way. So there's lots of patterns that have changed. So as well as kind of like looking, I think, a little bit with some sociological lenses, demographic lenses on who isn't using cars, I think we might actually see some more robust information on the maps. And then also we can maybe, without really changing the car demand, whatever the traffic engineers worry about with cars, right? The load.
Level of service.
Thank you. Level of service. That was a phrase I wasn't thinking about. Level of service for cars. I'm going to say for cars because it's really about level of service for cars, right? And that's the problem, right? There's really not, we could take it back to like the pre-COVID era, and I would postulate, and not that we have the data to prove it now, that those cars weren't driving as aggressively when they were in bumper to bumper traffic. So there's that too. So let's I love where you're going, and let's keep it going. So that's all. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councilman Sharland?
Hey, thank you. I don't have a whole lot to say here other than I'm excited for a commitment to Vision Zero. As I think about this, the roads that we provide are like any other utility that we provide as a municipality. And the fact that, if it was any other utility, be it, water or our facilities in rec centers or the housing authority, and we heard that or we had reports that people were being injured or worse, dying at them, it would be a full-scale crisis. And the fact that we can still provide roads that are where people are dying and people are getting hurt needs to be something that is addressed with that same urgency that we would address, poison in our water system or facilities that people were getting hurt at. And so I'm excited that for the commitment to Vision Zero. It can't come soon enough, and I thank you for your hard work on this as we move Pittsburgh forward, and let whatever we can do to help. We need to help right away. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, yeah, so yeah, I definitely have some questions. I mean, some I know the answers to, but just to kind of, so just quickly, just sort of, and maybe it's too many people to name all of them, but I am curious about who participated in the advisory group. I know we have Bike Pittsburgh in the audience. I'm fairly certain Pittsburgh's for public transit, maybe. I was just curious, I don't know if like AARP or others, yeah.
Yeah, I can go ahead and start the response to that. So we did take, well, first of all, the 2016 Complete Streets policy does provide some specific parameters around who or how the composition of the advisory group should be made up. So it says advocacy groups, it says people who have different levels of physical mobility. It says, agencies that might have a role in healthy and active living. And so what we did with the return of Complete Streets Advisory Group is take a look at that. We looked at who was on the advisory group last time. All of the members, and we have just over 30 right now, are the affiliate members, so people who are representing an organization, are listed on our Complete Streets Engage page. I tell people that, the advisory group is a rolling basis at this point, and so if there's agencies or individuals that are interested, we're looking to, include more of those people. For me, I think what we really want to try to see the representation of that group reflect is really Pittsburgh as a whole. And I think that's where our biggest hurdle is. It's like not the people we already know that are in the space talking about these things. It's actually just the people who are having to deal with the consequence of these limited transportation options, and can, want to be a part or can participate in a public process. So in my mind, we'll be really successful with the composition of the Complete Streets Advisory Group when I don't recognize as many of the names. As much as I love them and respect all the folks that are on that group, we have to get just our everyday user reflected in this group for it to, I think, really be everything it can be.
Yeah, that's great. And I'd love to see too, just folks from the community groups in those J40 areas, from the local community groups, at least whether it's a representative from the group or someone they identify from the community might be a way to sort of get that done. My next question is about, so this is something I'm just kind of curious about, and I know that I always hear it would, is sidewalks. Do we have any idea of how much money it would take for the city of Pittsburgh to just take over our site? Because this whole thing of PLI and citing people, and I know you all were doing this pilot and seeing if we can pave just a little section. It's not getting us where we need to be. And I have wheelchair users riding in Second Avenue. I have, kids walking in the street because, cars are parked on the sidewalk and all of that. So, and maybe we don't know yet, but any thoughts about how we could get a handle on our sidewalks?
So the short answer is no. We do not know what it would cost for the city to fully take over the sidewalks. That would be the full responsibility of their condition, in addition to constructing where they don't exist currently. And so that would be in the many, many millions of dollars, of course. Sort of maybe a point of reference is our paving program. So right now we are responsible at DOMI, of course, for paving our streets. Last year, I believe we were able to pave 45 or so miles of streets, and that was how many millions of dollars? 18, I think.
12 million.
12 million. That only represents about 1.5 to 3.5% of the total miles of roadway in our city. And so just to give a point of comparison for scale of how many thousands of miles of that infrastructure exists and sort of the many, many millions that would require. But it is something that you do see in other cities sometimes, is the city is responsible for constructing and managing those sidewalks.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be curious about that. It's funny with the paving because, you get a lot of paving requests. And, ironic, on one little section of my street was paved a number of years ago. And at the time, I remember thinking, oh, man, because those bumps really slowed everybody down, So I was like, well, but again, looking like we have this paving budget. I guess it's a little different if you're on a bike, the potholes are a problem. I understand. But that we're putting this giant budget into, cars being able to ride smoothly along our roads, but we don't have dedicated funding for sidewalks. And I don't know. I mean, this would be something to talk about with OMB and other members, but some type of, we have a library tax, we have a parks tax, something for us to be able to manage our sidewalks. And then we could have a little more standing when we say, hey, you can't park on the sidewalks, right? At any rate, that's just a thought. For the signals, that's an interesting question about the no right turn on red lights. One thing is I'm curious too. I actually had this is left turn signals that are aligned with the cross. I mean, I was on Browns Hill Road. We went to we had the walk, and I was with my kids, and my daughter just ran out. Which of course, we tell them not to do that. Like, don't do that. Don't trust the crosswalk. Don't trust which is insane. But and yeah, this guy was making a left out of just like the Dunkin' Donut thing. And I mean, it was like right in front of my eyes. It was like this. I mean, he just had to hit the brakes. It was terrifying. So, I mean, left turn signals. Any thoughts on sort of getting those signals in there? I'm assuming it's the arrow, right? When we say that, the left turn arrow.
Yeah, this is a relatively new trend in Pittsburgh. Past 4 or 5 years, the first one was 5th and Negley in the city. So you can, if you have a dedicated left turn lane, signalizing it, I don't have the percentage in my head, but signalizing it with a flashing yellow arrow turn signal does have a demonstrated reduction in crashes for all users. I know exactly what you're talking about. In that case, there is no dedicated left turn lane. And so the best thing there would be a leading pedestrian interval of at least 5 seconds. Now, how, as in 5 seconds when your child stepped off the curb and hit the ground, they would have 5 seconds to move with no conflicts. Is that enough for an able-bodied person to get to where they need to be to reinforce right-of-way? Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. I would honestly say at that point, and this goes back to your point, Councilmember Gross, is that crossing 4-lane or 5-lane highways is hard. And so we can throw everything we can towards a traffic signal implementation, but it's always going to be difficult. And sometimes I think the biggest cure is if we don't need all 5 of those lanes, can we get away with that?
Mm-hmm. And then the other with signals, another thing which I love is at Forbes and Murray and Squirrel Hill. And there's another one in Oakland, maybe at Craig and Forbes, where it's all the walks are on at once and everybody's stopped. Is that something that's feasible? Again, like if we're thinking about, it's not about traffic flow. It's not about how quick you get in your car from A to B. It's about making it safe. So, I mean, what would the feasibility be there of just kind of making all crosswalks just, I don't even know what you call that.
There's a whole bunch of names for it. That is feasible. Research shows mixed results in terms of the efficacy of that treatment. And so I try to use them with a light hand. In terms of if you have like a critical mass of pedestrians who are trying to cross the road, then you get good compliance with the pedestrian signal. The longer your signal cycle goes, And this isn't, in terms of traffic engineering world, like safety is my number one concern. Level of service for cars is far below that. You do have poor compliance from all users the longer your signal cycle goes from a patient standpoint. And so there are studies that have shown an increase in crashes based on that. And so I want to be very careful and make sure Forbes and Murray, Forbes and Shady, Forbes and Craig. There are other ones that are going to come to my head too, Forbes and Morewood. Fifth, no, that's don't. I have them all in my head somewhere. So if you have a critical mass of pedestrians, that is when, because then chances are, if you have, and I think the number LA uses is something like over 1,000 an hour. I don't necessarily subscribe to that. I am very interested in doing it more, as long as the context and the criteria is such that we're confident we're going to get a good outcome from it, and we're not going to have both pedestrians and motorists going against their respective signals.
I had one quick thing.
Yeah, sure.
I wish when Councilmember Mosley had asked what were the sort of higher level policy things that we would want to see advocacy behind, and this goes Councilmember Strasburger. When you get a driver's license in most states in the U.S., your test may not reflect an urban environment. You hear Mike here, our municipal traffic engineer, talking about signals. Thank you, Councilmember Warwick, for asking those questions that a lot of the people driving on our streets may never experience anywhere else in the broader region. And so I think from an education standpoint, something that we can't control from within our department at all, but something that we would love to see some movement on are what licensing exams contain, because especially as infrastructure changes, if parking protected bike lanes, for example, become legal, we will want to make sure that people who are licensed to operate motor vehicles and are able to enter Pittsburgh know how to work around these things and work within them. We saw that when we installed mini traffic circles for the first time in the city a couple years ago, that there was a lot of confusion around how you drive around a mini traffic circle. So while we've seen the safety improvements, we've seen the reduction in speeds, we've seen a reduction in the percent of drivers that are speeding with these interventions, we also want to make sure that people are educated on how to safely operate within them if they're new, and especially in an urban context like Pittsburgh.
I was going to add, I think we're very fortunate that we have a municipal traffic engineer who appreciates and always leads with safety, and especially for our most vulnerable road users. I want to say this, though, because I feel like Councilwoman Gross, this sort of came from some of your comments as well. A lot of the work that is being done right now around improving roadway safety has to do with undoing some of the harms that have come from the past. So like the fact that we have just completely invested in the vehicle as the primary mode of transportation, and that the design guidelines and the traffic guidelines all prioritize the movement and efficiency of vehicles is sort of what we're up against. So it's an exciting and an encouraging time, because USDOT, I think, is really making some great strides with the J40 initiative, Reconnecting Communities grant, and other initiatives to say, how are we actually addressing safety, and how are we undoing some of that harm from the past by putting people before vehicles.
Yeah. So my next question is around bikeability. So I've actually been biking more recently myself, and I have to say, at least, I mean, on the East End, I find that it's very good, right? So I can get from, on an e-bike, I can get from Greenfield to Bloomfield in like 20 minutes. And I feel safe. Like there's, either it's small streets that I'm getting led down. I use Google Maps, or it's protected bike lanes. I feel pretty good, right? I mean, I have lights and all that kind of stuff. But there are obviously areas where you just wouldn't feel safe at all. So I'm curious about for 2024, what are the big bike projects on the horizon for this year?
Big bike projects for 2024. Penn Circle is going to be completing construction. That is the undoing the urban renewal legacy of ring roads around malls. And so it's the second phase of that. And it's going to include, don't tell anyone this, but parking protected bike lanes.
Okay.
As in PennDOT.
Okay.
That's probably the biggest feather in our cap for this year, I would say. Stanton Avenue Phase 2 is going to have That's a combination of Councilmember Gross and Councilmember Mosley's district. That is going to also have accommodations for cyclists on an important stretch of Stanton that is on our high injury network. I'd also like to add. There's going to be a section of Negley Avenue between Penn. No, not Penn. Help me out here. Negley Avenue. Sorry, I'm talking Penn between Negley and Euclid. That's currently a 4 or 5 lane roadway. That's going to be restriped with bicycle facilities to provide a connection from Negley to Euclid, where Penn Circle 2-phase is going to occur. I think that covers me.
Okay, great. And I do want to say, this is, everyone at this table has heard this pitch, but, the pogo bikes, which, by the way, you can also put scooters in those same racks. If we could get those stations within a 5-minute walk from everyone's, that would be the generational change, right? All of our kids would use those bikes. And then, hopefully PRT can catch up with the transit service. But in any case, at least in the city, the denser central part of the city, that's, when the bikes, if you build it, they will come with bikes. We see it in cities all over the world, right? If the bikes are there, people use them, and then once they're using them, that's the way you get around. And once you live the bike lifestyle, it's you're used to it. So I'm a big believer in that, and I think that's very doable over the next 3-4 years. So I appreciate Director Lucas, your advocacy around alternative mobility solutions. So traffic calming. I know we've got Greenfield Avenue, which I'm very excited about, and there's Hazelwood Avenue was going to be last year, but it's probably going to be this year. What else is on the docket for traffic calming? Just for the other members. I don't know if folks,
You're asking a lot of me. I don't have those off the top of my head.
Okay.
What I will, so we have a backlog of projects that did not get completed at the end of 2023.
Okay.
Stanton Avenue will include traffic calming interventions. Shaler Street is a project that did not get completed in 2023. Hazelwood Avenue, Greenfield Avenue. Beyond that, what I will say is that we truly try and keep this a rolling application program, because we're constantly, the number of applications we get and the data we collect is continual. And so if we find a roadway that rises to the top of our needs based on everything, safety, speeding, equity, I want to have the flexibility to fast track a project there. And so we are going to be sticking with our general, you'll know about projects about 3 months in advance. And we are scaling up our program for this year.
Great. So just on this, and I know we've sort of wrangled over this in the past. So, everybody, as much as people say that, you hear lots of, people shut, but people love the speed hump. People love the traffic calming. It absolutely works. Anybody who hates it is the problem, and that's why we put them in there. That's the way I see it. But, when you have communities, when you have, for example, very residential community, small streets, not a lot of traffic, and then you have communities on the outskirts of the city. For my district, I just think of like the 31st Ward, where there just aren't as many people. The data is never going to show that that's a priority for traffic calm. There just aren't as many people, so there aren't as many accidents. So there aren't, So how, you did talk a little bit about sort of getting, lighter, faster, less expensive ways to put those things in. I know that we go back and forth about stop signs all the time, but I've driven through neighborhoods in Squirrel Hill where I feel like there's just like a stop sign every block, and you go slow in those streets. Whether it's bollards or just paint, or even letting people do encroachment permits to put like a planter on on a corner how can we, 15-mile-an-hour signs, all these things, how can we get a little bit more flexibility so that when folks ask for these things, we can deliver them quickly so that we can so that they can be patient and about the other, because it's very hard for folks to ask for and to tell them, to be honest with you, call 311, put it in, but then nothing, there's like, why? I never see, but so little things that we can do just to kind of give them the sense that, yes, we heard you, here's something small. And in the meantime, we're working through citywide on these bigger projects.
You ask hard questions. What I will say is that this is my number one struggle in my job. And I know you appreciate that. Absolutely. And I pride myself on I try and be the most flexible traffic engineer in Western Pennsylvania. In terms of, I take that seriously. In terms of, I'm not going to, I gotta think about how I word this. Safety is my number one priority. I care far more about the people who are walking and rolling than I do traffic congestion. What I will say is that there's always going to be a certain amount of pinch point, and there are certain things we can do fairly easily. The volume being asked of us is so high that our really limited staff is always going to be slower to respond than I want. That's a reality that I just have to ask for everyone's patience for. And other things such as stop signs, I do take that very seriously as a traffic control device, and every single stop sign that changes, I personally review. And it's not from a position of being stodgy or defiant or difficult to work with. It's purely the research and data out there says one thing, and I have to reconcile that with the community's responses, and I take that role very seriously. I'll also say that we're new, we're still young, and that every year we're going to evolve differently in terms of where you see changes and flexibility. So I can't give you too many specifics right now, but we are growing and we're changing.
Did you have a question? Yeah.
I do have a follow-up, and it's a perennial question for me that I don't think I've ever gotten a great answer to, and that's what post agendas are for. We have a width of the vehicle lane in the city. In some places, we're expanding them, like the Liberty Avenue HZIP project. But we know that the wider your lane, the higher your speed if you're a vehicle, right, when you're driving. And so that's bad for pedestrian safety. And then I had to live through a failed WUNRF in the Strip District, which is a place where you don't have curbs and it's kind of a shared, place, something they do in other countries where we have a kind of shared pedestrian and car space, and it just didn't get through DOMI. And so it ended up being a curb and street length. And the, iterations ago, this is probably almost 8 years ago, the traffic engineer, was not Mike Malik, said, well, it has to be this wide, even though this is a portion of street that is city street, but it terminates at the river. So like 26th Street is the end of 26th Street, if I'm remembering correctly. And so it had to be the same lane width as like Liberty Avenue and Bloomfield, which is a major artery. And that just seems crazy pants. So like if you go to Chatham campus, has anyone ever been on it? Those are not city streets. Those are private campus streets. And the lanes are like 10 feet wide. And they're two directions. So when you're on one of those little windy streets and another car's coming the other way, you both basically stop because you cannot believe that your cars aren't hitting each other because it's just so narrow. But it's still a two-way street. Why aren't we making narrow streets? Why aren't we making narrow travel lanes where we want cars to go slower?
I think we can answer that in part by talking about the design guidelines and the standards that we use. So not everywhere is so fortunate to have a creative and thoughtful traffic engineer like we do in the city of Pittsburgh. And so roadway engineering vastly relies on published manuals and standards. And we know from our experience, working with the state DOT, how influential and restrictive certain quick build or easy intervention safety projects can be to get done when the only manual that we feel reference and feel comfortable utilizing is Ashtone MUTCD. So we have to look for ways to put into our toolkit recognized standards that are reflective of multimodal and urban environments. Reduced travel lanes shouldn't have to be a design exception if you're on a street that is a commercial district and not a truck route. And understanding the influence that guidelines and regulations have on the decisions that our engineers can make is part of this. And then working to solve that through adopting new policies or additional standards is how we address it.
There are too many streets in this city that are designed like a truck route. I'm just leave it there. I'm not going to say it like a question. There just are too many, right? And I'm sure we could talk another several hours about that and turning radiuses and lots of other stuff. So, so I just wanted to make sure that we hadn't talked about lane widths. I talked about the number of lanes earlier, but I just wanted to make sure we threw that in. So I appreciate it, Councilwoman.
Councilwoman, if you approve, I want to talk a little bit
Yeah,
about the
please,
Justice
go ahead.
41 that you pointed out. So you are absolutely correct when you pointed out that there is a lot of neighborhood in our city which won't be approved, those factors and variable we use in the neighborhood traffic calming program and the program like that. So it is very important that we put a little bit more close look on those neighborhoods, and that's where neighborhood mobility plans kind of play a huge role. For example, Councilman Mosley's district, Homewood, is a perfect example. We did a mobility plan back in 2020 and 2021. We go for a capital budget for that neighborhood specifically because many of those projects that we have identified there, those traditional ranking that we use, they will never keep up there because historically we are redlining those communities in such a way. Shady Side with Homewood is not even a comparable at this moment. So we have to be proactive and we have to dedicate a fund for those neighborhoods specifically for their improvement. We did the work, and 2022 was the first year Homewood has zero fatality in there. They are a zero, like a vision zero neighborhood in a way, if you want to call it. And the way we did is through this type of neighborhood mobility plan, where we specifically focus on that neighborhood and we specifically look for money in that neighborhood rather than fighting with all this 1,000 application. They will just get the priority because that's the whole point of equity versus equality.
I like that idea, neighborhood mobility plans. And I want to talk a little bit about this sort of encroachment permit idea. It's something that we're kind of initially, so, I mean, I have a couple cases of folks who have cars parking up to the edge of the curb, and so they can't see when they're coming out of their little street, and so, you know, they're going to put an encroachment. But that's a very easy one, right? That's just like putting a plant, or whatever, I don't know what they'll do, but a planter or something in the space where cars can't legally park anyway. But I'm curious, I mean, again, and this is more like up in the residential neighborhoods, and you know, I get that you all are strapped for resources, right? But I mean, I can't stress this enough. You know, when you live up, and again, this is where there is not a ton of traffic, right? It's just, you know, local residential. When someone calls and says, the cars blow through this stop sign and they cut across the curb, we don't need to do a study on that. Those are the neighbors, they live on those corners, and they see it happen every day to the point that they are calling us and they're telling us that that is happening. So, you know, in those cases, you know, and this is not something we've tried yet, but, you know, if they want an encroachment, but just for example, to put a concrete planter sort of off the curb so that instead of just sort of whoosh, going like this to make the turn, you have to actually go, you know, around and make the turn. Is that something that, you know, we will be able to, and I know it's hard because it's like, oh, you know, we're so nervous that it might, you know, mess something up, but we do kind of have to like let go and sort of just let the people do the thing that they think is going to work because they're seeing it every day. I mean, maybe, sure, someone has to maybe come out and be like, all right, you know, this would be where it is, but it wouldn't, I don't think, require a study, so to speak. I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
I'll talk a little bit about the encouragement process. We have used it successfully in business districts who do things like install planters, or in downtown they've installed the outdoor dining platforms, which, you know, maybe they're not technically traffic calming, but I certainly think that a more lively street sort of will calm traffic because it's a very different experience for the traveler. So there is a pathway. I think the maintenance piece and the insurance liability piece are two issues which would need to be solved for I think what you're describing, which is like a neighborhood traffic calming, you know, sort of toolkit. So I would want to approach it as a sort of program where we set a standard or set guidelines and people can participate in it. My remark is that, you know, due to the limited resources, we are always balancing 311s and complaints that we're hearing directly with the people in the communities that we know are not submitting the same volume of 311 requests or have access to, you know, their council member, or feel as though they have access to their council member in the same rate. And so for DOMI, we're constantly thinking and making sure that our resources are being allocated equally throughout the city, and that we're prioritizing especially those areas that maybe are not out there advocating for themselves and have also been historically left behind in a lot of transportation investments. So I think there is a pathway there. I think that where it lies in sort of the priority of things that we need to do, I have some thoughts about just knowing all, you know, the range of work to be done. But it could be a great opportunity for a partnership.
Yeah, I think that's, and I would challenge other members, you know, to sort of try and do that, you know, make that so that folks know, you know, if we do come up with a toolkit like, oh, here's some things you can do kind of in your area, and then, you know, get them to find that, you know, that active person on the block who would go around and help get that done. Yeah, that would be great. That kind of leads me to kind of my last, not so much a question, but just sort of a comment. I think that there's a huge, and sort of starting with today, I will say, you know, we're in press conference this afternoon, a real public safety campaign around this issue of reckless and dangerous driving, and distracted driving, you know, between the mayor, neighborhood services, our public safety folks, you know, our community groups, you know, whether it's, you know, ads on social media, there's lots of ways to reach lots and lots of people. And I think that there is potential to really make the change on this. You know, I always say, I remember years ago, I don't know if anyone else remembers this, but President Obama got us all to start sneezing in our arms. And we all do it now, right? I mean, it was, you know, it's something, you know, these things, they do sink in. The bike helmets, the seat belts, all these type of stuff. So I think that there's a lot of potential there. Anyway, I'm very excited about this. So thank you all so much for being here. Are there any other questions from members? No? Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. I guess that concludes our post agenda, and I'll see you all this afternoon. Oh, I gotta.